I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is a regular meeting. We don't have all the regular formalities of in-person meeting, but Rotary connectivity is still there. The main agenda item this evening is on childhood obesity, and our lone presenter is Dr. Anjani Sharma, but I'll come back to her in a minute. I just want to cover a couple of points before we go into her presentation. One is that I hope that we're all okay from COVID. And for some of us, the last time we met at fellowship was almost a month ago at UPIC. Looks like just a few days ago. And I guess listening to Courtney, we're all anxious, looking for another fellowship opportunity, which subject to COVID guidelines, I'm sure we can arrange. And that's coming soon. Two, this week was Rotary's 116th anniversary, and you may have seen the emails and the information on Rotary. It's a long time. For the newcomers, Paul Harris started 1905, from what I recall, many years ago. Thirdly, I visited PP Nabi, and I omitted in putting his name. I just put PP, and I assume some of the older Rotarians would know that that is Nabi. He was ailing for some time. I went there to his place about 2 weeks ago, and he was not taking any visitors. He was quite happy to have a visitor. For the benefit of those who don't know Nabi, he's functioning on one kidney that he got donated maybe 30 to 35 years ago. He was still in very jovial spirit, even though you see him sitting up on a hospital bed there, anxious to get out. He can do a little walking, and he's looking forward to getting back into going to his business. He did indicate that quite recently donated some items, medical supplies, for our care packages, and he's quite willing to continue to do that as a Rotarian and as an individual. So it's great to chat with him. He really welcomes visitors and people looking for him. He's not, he's not forgotten. That's the main message. Also, for the benefit of the group, past President Bishnu had an accident, fell on Saturday. They would probably have more of an update, but I got some update from Talim via mail messages. He's recovering. He's out of ICU. He is in the ward, and I believe he's taking visitors. I'll communicate with Talim, and if okay, we'll pop in for a short visit tomorrow. Next item on my list here of remarks will be, on Wednesday last, I joined in a wheel club to deliver a wheelchair. They'd reached out to us for a wheelchair. We donated the wheelchair, which was intended as Rotary, to go direct to a recipient that they had identified. So I was asked to join. I went with them, about 6 members of the Inner Wheel Club, and we delivered the wheelchair into Napuna. At that point, I took the opportunity to chat with a few of the inner wheelers and the president, and invited them to join in our project, which is collection of clothes and delivery of care packages and delivery of food packages. And they were all excited to join, and we're going to treat it as a joint project. They will get their credit for the project. We'll do our thing. I reached out to both Sita and Ajay and confirmed that all the drop-off can be at A1, Monday to Friday, 8 to 4, Saturdays up to 2. We'll collate everything at that drop-off point and then use that point for sorting and ultimately delivery. So the project is on, and an email will be sent with further details to all members in a couple of days. So either tomorrow or Friday, you'll get an email to all members with all the details. And second to last on my list is first week of March is World Glaucoma Week. And that is from the 7th onwards. We have a program and a meeting planned with presentation by CEI. CEI is Caribbean Eye Institute, headed by Dr. Teelucksingh. He and his team will do a presentation on the 10th at our regular meeting. That's Wednesday, 10th of March on glaucoma. And last on my list is that we are planning an induction ceremony for a number of new Rotarians. We have 3 or 4 at this stage. We have some other prospects, and within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we are aiming for 5, which will bring us, once we achieve that, will bring us 10. I saw another club doing a single induction for 12 in COVID period. So the clubs are growing in the region, and we'll do our part to meet our target. Our target was 7, but we believe that we could do at least 5. And that ceremony will be either late March or early April. So if anyone in line with any new prospects, you can email us and we'll take care from there. So having shared those opening remarks, we'll move to our feature speaker or presenter. And Maria, what you sent me, can I use that or you have it displayed?
No, use what I sent you.
Okay, good. So as I said earlier, our presenter is Dr. Anjani Sharma. She's a UK-trained family physician and practitioner in health promotion. She has a special interest in non-communicable disease management, of which childhood obesity prevention plays a big part. She worked at the Ministry of Health in Trinidad in the area of childhood obesity prevention, provided technical advice on CV development with the Ministry of Education, TT. She conducted research and health education projects with Professor Teelucksingh, including development material for research and health promotion in schools. Until recently, she was the diabetic lead in a 10,000 patient practice in the UK, which had a rating of excellent for diabetes and chronic disease management. The presentation this evening gives an overview of the cause and effects of childhood obesity in Trinidad and Tobago. It was developed with Professor Teelucksingh to provide key health education messages for targeting behavior change. So I'm pleased to present Dr. Anjani Sharma, and for full disclosure, she's sister of our incoming president, Dr. Rishi Sharma. So over to you, Anj, and Maria will provide the technical support. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you and good evening, all Rotarians, and thank you for the opportunity to allow me to present this information, which is very close to my heart. For someone who, as myself, who has been involved in non-communicable disease management and health promotion, childhood obesity prevention is at one end of the spectrum of that. So by the time we get adults with chronic disease, we're just managing a disease. But if we can capture people earlier on in the life course, it's far more effective. And there's global support for that. So this presentation was developed, really, we took this out to schools to educate young people as well as their teachers and parents. And the idea is it's supposed to be interactive and fun, and it sort of gets you to think about some of the important things. Although childhood obesity, which is the term that's used, it's far more appealing to call it a focus on of healthy weights in children, and CARFA has definitely adopted that strategy with their policy development because childhood obesity has a stigma attached to it, and it sounds almost as though it's a condition of children when actually it's a lot about lifestyle choices which children don't actually govern. They are, you know, players in a family, they have food bought for them, they are within a school setting, they may be restricted in terms of what level of physical activity they can do. So the idea is that by educating people on simple bite-sized lifestyle modifications that they can implement, they don't need to wait on wider society to do policy changes, etc. Is everything okay? I'm not seeing anything on my screen.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's happening. But keep on. I'm seeeing it loading. I tested it was okay.
All right,
so no I'm problem. Seeing it loading.
So 3 main things that we focused on in this setting in Trinidad and Tobago, because obviously we don't want to overload people with information. As I said, this is with the basis of trying to look at making sure that children have a healthy weight. And it can't be done in isolation. It has to be done in a whole society setting. So within a family, the same things that will provide a healthy weight in children will also make parents healthy. And children, as we know, are not always great listeners, but they're very good imitators. So if they see people around them doing things like drinking water, simple things like drinking water, eating fruit and vegetables, being more physically active, it will be taken in as part of the culture of what they know to do, and they will also do it. And that as well has been proven over time. So usually at this point, I would ask some key questions for people to join in and just give some answers. One of the first of which is, and obviously you can join in and give me answers, but anyone could say which is the most important meal of the day?
That's the slide.
Breakfast.
Okay, good, yeah. And we'll go into why that is. If we could go to the next slide, please, Maria. Yeah, and then if you click, and then to the next question, which shape is healthier? Does anyone know between the term apple and pear, which of those two shapes is a healthier shape? No answers? Okay, we'll get to that. What is the minimum number of hours of sleep that a teenager needs to be healthy?
Apple.
No, number of hours.
12.
Oh, okay, well, 12 is good, but that's, yeah, not, that's probably for a younger child, that may be true, but a teenager going into adulthood, it's less than that, but we'll get to that as well. What is the minimum amount of time that a child between the ages of 5 to 18 years should exercise daily?
4.
So the minimum amount of time would be 60 minutes, and I'll show you the evidence for why that is. And what is the best choice of beverage when you're thirsty?
Water.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so if we go on the next slide, this is a world famous drawing that describes what's known as the determinants of health. And in the red central circle, you have constitutional factors and things we cannot change. We can't change our age. We can't change our gender at birth. I know people can do gender change now. And we can't change our genetics. But all the other things that go in the semicircles around it are actually things we can change, we can have an impact on. And all of those things work together to impact our health and well-being. So where we go to school, whether we, what sort of work we do, all of those things will actually impact how healthy we are. So the things in the center that we can't change, one of the biggest is genetics, and ethnicity is tied into that. We can't change that, and certain genetic profiles and certain ethnicities make us more prone to certain types of diseases like diabetes and heart disease. But in terms of individual lifestyle factors, which is the next most important semicircle after the unchangeable factors, there are 4 main individual lifestyle factors which have been recognized globally as having a big role to play in the most common non-communicable diseases. So on the next slide, they are summarized as SNAP or smoking, because these are 4 things that we can choose to do or not to do. Smoking, poor nutrition, either over or under eating, alcohol excess, because as we know, and many studies have shown, a small amount of alcohol is not harmful, and being physically inactive. The less we move, the more our bodies have to work in terms of metabolic rate and things like that. So I've put a little a sidebar there that just tells you that obviously poor nutrition and physical inactivity are influenced by other factors. People are people. If something is inconvenient and not widely available in terms of fruits, vegetables, or on the other side of that, if all that is available is fried foods or fatty foods, unhealthy things, and it's easily available and it's cheap, then people will have a tendency to access that more easily. And it's also probably more convenient because it's already made. a lot of people think of the initial cost of healthy food as being a barrier to actually going to healthy food. A lot of healthy food has a short shelf life, so it needs to be used. And some people will say that in a family of 4 or 6, it's quite expensive to pay for healthy foods. The time required for preparing healthy foods and also for putting aside to do physical activity is an issue. The more technical we've gotten over time. We are right now in a Zoom meeting, so that's just one example of how great technology can be. But on the flip side of that, it means that we have machines that do most things for us. We jump in a car to make a journey, or we will have electronic devices at home to do washing and cleaning and things that maybe 40 years ago we would have been physically doing ourselves. And so again, it helps with time and convenience, but it just means that we're doing less physically than we've done before. And of particular note at the moment is that with technology and this pandemic, it's been a great way of continuity for schoolwork, but it's also meant that children are even less physically active than they would normally be in the school setting. And then obviously there are things, other influencers such as TV, which their programs and adverts are bombarding us with subliminal messages all the time about what's desirable in terms of eating, drinking, and influencing our food choices. So on the next slide, we'll see that these 4 changeable, choosable lifestyle choices, that are 4 choosable lifestyle factors: unhealthy eating, excess alcohol, physical inactivity, and tobacco use, are at the root of the 4 major categories of non-communicable disease. So they basically feed into the development of these later on in life. And the next slide just reiterates that really. So when we take that, that's happening all over the world. But the next slide shows that in Trinidad, and I've used this slide before because I think it's quite effective. This is mortality data or causes of death data, the reason people die in Trinidad and Tobago. And obviously what we worry about, what we hear in the news and the media and everywhere around, is that things like road traffic accidents and violent crimes are the things we're probably most worried about. But actually the things that are killing people the most are due to coronary heart disease and diabetes. As you can see, they're 2 and 3 times more in terms of mortality rate than actually cause of death by car accidents or violent crimes. So although it's not really spoken about, and I think a lot of people think that they are not changeable things. Well, my mom died of heart or diabetes, so I will probably have it as well. And although that may be true from a genetic link, as I was saying to you, the lifestyle choices we make can actually heavily impact the way those diseases affect us. So in the next slide, I've just taken the context of Trinidad and Tobago, looking at chronic disease risk factors. So there was a study done in 2011 called the STEPS Risk Factor Survey done by the Ministry of Health. And they looked at people all over Trinidad and Tobago. And obviously, as we get older, the idea is that our metabolism changes and we may become more easily affected by things like higher blood pressure. Being less physically active may mean that we have more risk of things like diabetes developing, etc. So that 65% of people sort of in the older age group, although 45 is not old and neither is 64, I'm talking about an older than the 25 to 44-year-old age group. To some extent, that age has a big impact on that. But what was really shocking is that the younger age group, so 25 to 44 years, had 2 or more risk factors. And these risk factors are not genetics or ethnicity. These risk factors were one of the 4 main sort of lifestyle choices that would lead to them developing an NCD later on in life. So, and that's our main reproductive years, 25 to 44. It's our sort of young working age group. So that is quite a concerning thing. So if we go to the next slide, two really simple points that we took out of the information from this study is that we all think that people eat healthily or we take it for granted, but actually they found that 9 out of 10 people did not eat the recommended amount of fruit and vegetables per day. Anybody know what that recommendation is? So, sorry?
5 a day?
Yeah, so everybody knows it as 5 a day, right? So the idea is 2 portions of fruit and 3 portions of vegetables. And the reason that it's important is because it provides the vitamins, the minerals, the nutrients, and the fiber that our bodies need to function properly. But imagine in a place like Trinidad and Tobago, where there's fruit and vegetables abundant, 9 out of 10 people just didn't have it on any sort of regular basis. And that fed down to if adults in a family are not eating the required amount of fruit and vegetables a day, then more than likely the children aren't doing it either. So, and physical activity wise, only half the number of people were getting the recommended amount of physical activity daily, which, as I said earlier, is minimum 1 hour for children between the ages of 5 to 18 years. And for adults over the age of 18, it is half an hour every other day. And that's minimum, just to keep your heart healthy, your bones strong, your muscles toned, etc. So we're not even talking about the amount of physical activity that's needed to burn the calories that we're consuming. On the next slide, that's a data heavy slide, so I apologize, but this starts talking about the impact of too much in terms of food and too little in terms of physical activity. So poor nutrition and physical inactivity. And it starts to impact something called the BMI. For a long time, globally, there was a bit of contention about measuring BMI in children, because obviously children will sort of gain weight, have a growth spurt, gain weight, have a growth spurt. So that's also the reason we don't want to keep telling children about obesity and overweight. Instead, if we focus on them eating balanced and healthy meals and being physically active, chances are they will actually, they will grow properly and the weight won't be an issue. But the key notes here are that in the Pan American STEP study, you could see that there's a huge amount of overweight and obesity between males and females. 40% were overweight or obese in males, and 33%, 33.7%. The Global Health School Surveys, which is done by PAHO, also shows a similar pattern. And these are children aged between 13 to 15 years. So it's, as I'm saying, it's a continuum of life, and children will imitate what they see. If their parents, their teachers, their older brothers and sisters are not physically active, they're not eating healthily, chances are they will also do that. So, and then there's a breakdown by age. In the next slide, this is data from a study that was done by Professor Teelucksingh and Ms. Yvonne Batson, who's a dietitian who's worked quite closely with him. And they basically screened Trinidadian school children, and they did this study a sort of decade apart. And in that time, you can see the increase in terms of obesity in school children, in terms of overweight and obese, tripling over time. So you really have quite a momentum of this going on. And this is what they've recorded in 2001 and 2011. 20 years before that, we've had clinicians in Trinidad pointing this fact out and telling us heart disease and diabetes is related to the fact that our children are moving less, consuming more. And that is not a blame, it's not a fault. That's actually lots of cultural factors, as I've said, lots of convenience and technical factors, but we've lost track of it a little bit. So the next slide shows a phenomenon called Ecampus Nigricans. Now, this was also looked at in the Trinidadian school children. And some people look at it and say, oh, that's muck on the child neck. But actually what it is, we call it nature's dipstick. So when there is excessive amounts of sugars in the body and the body is trying to process that, it affects the way that metabolism occurs. And it starts to deposit some coloration in the neck crease, and also sometimes you'll see it in the armpits. It starts at the top left corner, it starts just as a little band, and then it actually progresses circumferentially around the neck until it meets at the front as well. And the significance of that, those 4 stages of Acanthosis nigricans, is that the more out of control things like blood sugar and blood pressure are, the more coverage that circle will have around the neck, and it's reversible. So you will find that as a child resumes a healthy diet and is more physically active and their weight starts to normalize, there will be a receding of the Acanthosis nigricans. So the next slide just reiterates that this is something that's occurring all around the world. 1 in 3 11-year-olds, so this is preteens, are overweight or obese, and that's in the European region. So the Caribbean is not on its own. This is happening everywhere. The slide which follows this shows some body shapes, and this is something else that was done in the school study conducted by Professor Teelucksingh. So it's the idea that children or young people, their perception of what is a healthy body shape. So I was asking earlier about apples and pears, and I wasn't talking about the actual fruit. Both of those fruits are healthy, but I was talking about the shapes of them. So apples are round in the middle, pears are round around the sort of one end. So the 1, 2, 3, the 4th and 5th from the left-hand side in terms of males and females are what is a healthy shape. So when they asked school children, Trinidadian school children, what they thought a healthy weight was, many of them chose, the girls actually chose much skinnier models in the picture, and the boys chose bigger. And the opposite was true of the measurements. So when girls were actually measured, they were thinner than they thought they were. They all thought they were in the larger category, and boys were the opposite. So it just shows you some perspectives there. Again, that could come through social media. It could come through the way we view one another, the way we speak about bodies with young people, what they are exposed to. But really what we're trying to do is try to get them to achieve a healthy shape, which you'll see on the next slide. So this just shows you your apple shape is more weight around the middle, and your pear shape is more weight below the waistline. And the relevance of that is that we have our main organ for helping to process body fats and body sugars, 2 organs really, one is the liver, one is the pancreas. They start to work in an abnormal way when we start to deposit fat around the middle. So if we go to the next slide, this just emphasizes is basically you are what you eat. So you want foods that will give you the right balance of things and give you fuel for what you need to do, but obviously excesses will cause us to put on weight around the middle. So we can break that down in the next slide to what's called this is oversimplifying, and the numbers are just arbitrary. But really what it's telling us about is something called the energy balance seesaw. So if we're eating this amount of calories, and you can see lots of brightly colored foods, which are always natural, fruits and vegetables come in bright colors, that's healthy, and you're taking the right amount of physical activity, that energy balance remains in check. In the next slide, we can see, oh, there we go, we need energy for growth, we need the food from calories. And remember, our bodies turn all foods into sugars to use for energy. So if we go to the next slide, when we consume too many calories and too many calories of the wrong type, so convenience food, fast food, high fat foods, basically it's impossible to burn it off. But worse than that, if you're sitting at a computer for most of the day, most of us as adults have sedentary jobs. None of us are Usain Bolt, like burning off thousands of calories in a training session. So it just sits there. And if we go to the next slide, sorry, if you skip this one, go to the next one. In addition to all that is going on and what we choose to eat, I've used the term false economy because portion sizes have increased over time. The human body has not increased, and what the human body can process and metabolize hasn't changed. But what we see as value for money, because we're getting 33% more in this or larger portion of fries for the same amount of money, we're actually doing ourselves more harm because we think we're getting something better, but actually we're getting more junk and stuff that we don't want that ends up impacting us. So if you go to the next slide, this looks very barren and very boring, but it's just to highlight the fact that a healthy meal should be made up 20% of starch that should be from more complex carbohydrates, 30% protein, and half your plate should be vegetables. However, in Trinidad, you can see on the next slide, and not just Trinidad, but this is what our plate would normally look like. So you want to make sure your belly full, and culturally is better belly bust than good food waste. So you end up with piling stuff on. Trinidadians love condiments. Trinidadians love soft drinks. And I'm not battering Trinidadians at all. Just out of interest, in 2015, the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, published a study that was done on soft drink consumption worldwide. And little Trinidad and Tobago featured in the article as one of the countries with the highest soft drink consumption in the world. And I'll tell you a bit more about why soft drinks are a little bit of an issue as we go on. So as you go on to the next slide, it comes back to the healthy shape, because what doesn't kill will fatten. And when it fattens around the middle. And when it fattens around the middle, it creates a problem called metabolic syndrome. So if we could move to the next slide. So metabolic syndrome is really, sorry, I have to click the mouse a few times, there pop-ups, yeah. So at the base of the pyramid is the unhealthy lifestyle. So being more sedentary, eating unhealthy foods. And basically what it shows is that metabolic syndrome means your body's pancreas and liver starts working abnormally. We stop processing sugars and fats in a normal way. And our bodies are not wasteful. Over time in evolution, what we do is that everything we eat, our body doesn't think, oh, I don't need that, I'll just get rid of it. Our body thinks, I'll save that, I'll hold on to it. And it converts it into fat and stores it. As we gain weight around the middle, what happens is it starts affecting our blood sugar control, our blood pressure control. For women, it can cause menstrual problems, polycystic ovaries. There is a higher prevalence of cancers in people who have what's called central obesity and metabolic syndrome. It causes flaring up of our arteries. It can affect mood. It can affect joints and bones because it's putting too much weight load on the joints and bones, especially in children. And all of that really mounts up at the top of the pyramid to causing us to have an unhealthy heart. The next slide just reiterates the idea of atherosclerosis, which is what happens when we consume fats and sugars. And if you click it again, it just shows you a photo. That's a buildup of cholesterol in an artery. Obviously, an artery is a vessel that feeds blood to an organ. So if that's trying to feed blood to your heart or your brain, the more cholesterol that builds up in there, the more restricted the blood flow. And that's where heart attacks and strokes come from. And studies have shown that children, even in their teenage years, start to build up atherosclerosis like this. So can you imagine if that's starting at that age and they don't make changes, what happens by the time they're adults? So the next slide comes back to one of our questions and this term of sweet too bad. So in terms of reading a food label, that's something that's really valuable for children and adults because it makes them a bit more aware of what they're consuming, right? And the one thing we pulled out of the food labels, which was quite relevant in the context of society that has a predilection for sweet things, is how many teaspoons of sugar, because it's hard when you look at something and it says so many grams of sugar, it's hard to actually contextualize that. But if you divide the grams of sugar by 4, you actually get the number of teaspoons of sugar. And that we can contextualize. So at this point, usually in the school setting and with parents, I would actually give them a bag of sugar and some Ziploc bags, and they can spoon out the teaspoons of sugar and have a look at what that looks like physically. And it's something you could try at home. You'd be quite shocked. So in a small soft drink, I don't want to call names, but something like a Chubby or a small fruit drink, you have 6 to 8 teaspoons of sugar. Now, you wouldn't put
listen to
Too much.
so if you wouldn't put 6 to 8 teaspoons of sugar in a cup of tea or in anything that you're drinking, yet we will have it in a soft drink. A large cooler, you'll have 70 grams. As I say, if you divide that by 4, you get your teaspoons of sugar. And we're loading all that sugar into our systems, and then we're probably sitting at a computer, or we're certainly not doing anything to burn off that amount of energy, that amount of fuel. So what happens? We store it as fat. So next slide. So the recommended number of teaspoons of sugar that children need is actually of added sugar, not sugar in foods, is 6 to 10 teaspoons a day. So when you calculate how much extra they're getting in soft drinks, juices, milkshakes, snacks, it is quite an eye-opener. So the other one that we have that's quite popular in the Caribbean, obviously, is condiments. We love to add the ketchup and the garlic sauce and all those things. I think the slide I don't know how small it is on your screens, but basically they also contain sugar is the bottom line. So it's just to be mindful of the things that we're adding that adds calories, salad dressings, all of those things. And the next slide is just a reiteration. You wouldn't eat 22 packets of sugar, so why are we drinking them? And if I'm sure you'll all have the presentation to have a look at in your own time. This link actually tells you in an animation about what happens when we consume high amounts of sugar. So the next slide, just as we've gone from what we're eating, are moving on to eating and drinking, what we're putting into the machine, to how much of that fuel we're actually using. So a study conducted by the Center for Disease Control in the States, so it was a huge study that basically looked at this minimum amount of time that children perform physical activity, and actually they use their grades as an outcome. What we know is that not only does it burn, not only does physical activity give us a healthy weight, helps to keep our hearts healthy, but it also boosts the circulation to our brains. So obviously what you then end up happening is you have children who are, I suppose if they're participating in regular exercise, they have better discipline, they're able to concentrate for longer, and it doesn't matter what kind of physical activity it is, whether it's cycling, running, dancing, something they enjoy, but a minimum of an hour a day. And they noted that children who did that consistently had better grades than children who did not. So the next slide takes us to what's important about sleep. So again, they asked children if sleep was important to them, and a large proportion of them, 2/3, said that yes, it was, but there were also the 2/3 who said they weren't sure or didn't think it was important. Just as much as we have to switch off a car, we have to switch off a computer, any finely tuned machine, we must switch off this body in order to metabolize, in order to grow, in order to process information. So again, this comes and ties into the use of technology and devices that if we're overstimulating children, what tends to happen, and they're getting less and less sleep, again, that affects their metabolism. So they have a tendency to try to stay up late. There's more tendency to consume sugary or unhealthy foods to give them the energy to stay awake. That makes them more tired, less able to do regular physical activity. It can make them grumpy. And then on top of all of that, it works together to affect their grades in school. So actually getting the right amount of sleep and looking at the screen time that children are having access to outside of their schoolwork is quite important. And has a role to play in childhood obesity or unhealthy weights in children. And the next slide, after sleeping, it's a gateway, a time machine to breakfast. So that's the most important meal of the day. And again, the reason breakfast is the most important meal a day, and Professor Teelucksingh loves the little expression, breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. So as we wake in the morning, we want to have the heaviest and most amount of calories we're going to have, because you have the whole day to burn it off. And the idea is that your meals get lighter as the day goes on. But in all honesty, once you're having balanced meals, as we showed with that slide of the sort of half your plate is a salad, a quarter is protein, a quarter is healthy carbohydrates, you're not going to go wrong. And again, studies have shown that children who eat breakfast in the morning, they actually fire up their metabolism, they burn calories more efficiently, and are less likely to gain unhealthy weight, and are less likely to be repeatedly hungry and snacking throughout the day. When you miss breakfast, it actually affects the way that you metabolize the foods that you eat for the rest of the day. Your body thinks, oh, I'm in starvation mode, and starts storing the things that you eat, storing the fat from the things that you eat. So the final slide is a little countdown we developed, which just ties together all of these facts into some tips. So this is obviously, as adults, we say that 6 hours of sleep is sufficient, 6 hours of good quality sleep. But for anyone on 18 years, 5 to 18 years, you're looking at, 12 to 18 years, because under 12, again, we need more hours, but you're looking at 8 hours of quality sleep to be at their best. 7 days a week, start the day with breakfast, 5 portions of fruit and vegetables every day. For children between the ages of 5 to 18 years, their screen time, leisure screen time, should be limited to no more than 2 hours per day, and 1 hour of physical activity every day to keep healthy and cut down on sugars and sweetened drinks. And as I started off by saying, obviously the life course, it's a continuum, and Rotary have actually contributed funding and support for another project that Professor Teelucksingh was instrumental in, which is the Health and Pregnancy Program, which is coming off the ground and is going nationwide. And the reason I mention that is because from pre-birth, if you have a healthy mom who has a healthy weight, she will give birth to a healthy child. And again, starting from that aspect, you're also impacting the course that child goes down. And things like breastfeeding, at least in the first 6 weeks of life, is also a very important marker to children having healthy weights as they get older. So it's, as I say, it's a continuum, looking at children, I guess, in the primary school age. Most of the decisions are made regarding their health and physical activity by their parents, and maybe even more so now that school is on lockdown and they're spending more time at home. As teenagers, their choices shift, and there is more autonomy for teenagers as to what they choose. But the common factor is, as a family, as a society, if we choose healthier options and show children and make that the culturally acceptable thing to do, obviously that will filter down and impact childhood obesity. There are big big picture things and societal changes, such as looking at marketing and advertising to children, increasing prices of sugar-sweetened beverages, and putting sugar tax all over the world. They've tried that. They've tried that in the UK, in Mexico, as some places in the States, and they've been effective measures. And they then take the money that they make out of that and put it back into physical activity programs for children. So that just gives an overview. Obviously, if there are any questions that you'd like to ask, please do so. Thank you.
Okay, the line will be open for questions, or Maria, if you have any via the chat, you can bring them up.
Okay.
No questions?
Hi, KB, Vinod here.
Yeah.
Yeah. what about drinks such as Viva and those other flavored, I guess they would call them carbonated water drinks, perhaps, that don't have sugar per se, but have other artificial sweeteners and so on in them. What is your take on those beverages?
So most doctors, pediatricians, dietitians will tell you that they are probably a reasonable option if you're trying to cut down soft drink and juice consumption, because you're not going from a sweet tooth to just water. I think people find that difficult. So that's a reasonable option. But the only thing is that artificial sweeteners in themselves are not good for your oral health. We don't know the long-term effects of them on the rest of your body. And what we're trying to do is dampen. The more sweet stuff we eat, the more sweet receptors kick off in our brains and the more we want to feed them. So the idea is, if we try to reduce how much sweetened things and artificially sweetened things we have in our diet, the less we'll actually crave them. So as I say, it's reasonable for trying to cut down or occasional use, but ideally you'd be trying to stick to water as much as possible.
Right. Thanks. I have a question. Well, you would have grew up in the same house as me, which is probably similar for everybody else here. That we all have busy lives. We get up in the morning, we're on the go. You have something light, you grab a coffee and something, and you leave. All day you're busy and you do things. Your kids in school, whatever. And the only time that we have as a family is you sit down in the evening and have dinner. And dinner would tend to be a heavy meal: rice, dal, chicken, roti, aloo, whatever. But you catch up on the day and you catch up on everybody else. And I'm sure everybody in this meeting could identify with that. But that is the opposite of what you're saying we should be doing. But there's strategies and that'll be cultural, that'll be familial, that'll be lifestyle. Is there ways that we could approach that, or some tips you could give us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can't change everything. And that's why this talk just gives tips and ideas that you can then work with instead of being instructive, right? The idea in that would be that still have your family meal time, but look at your portion sizes. You don't have to, and I know we are guilty of this in my own household, but in terms of, you don't have to eat one roti, you can eat a half, or you know what I mean, or mix your carbohydrates to have more whole wheat. Make sure that half your plate is salad, so the portion sizes you're eating are smaller. Try to regulate your meal times with your family so that they're a bit earlier on, so you have at least a couple of hours after you've eaten, that you are awake, that you are doing things and interacting and burning some of those calories. Don't have soft drinks or sweetened drinks with your dinner. So just small things like that can make a big difference. The later we eat, the closer it is to bedtime. And all we're doing is we're hibernating, and our bodies are just taking all of those calories and thinking, okay, thank you, I'll just store those up.
We have a question from Larry. He asks, have the definitions of screen time being adjusted to the advances in technology and also the pandemic? Given that in the past, the screens may be limited to a computer monitor and a TV set. Now we have mobile phones, Kindles, tablets, etc., some of which are easier on the eyes than others.
So obviously the ophthalmologists in this meeting will know more about the effects of these devices on eye health. I'm actually talking about the effects of device use causing sedentary activity. So the more that you use a device, the longer you spend on devices, the less active you're going to be. And I know they've tried to adjust that by creating things like Wii and interactive games, but they're still not the same, and they still don't provide the same level of socialization, which is important for child development, as just being off a device and interacting with another human being and being physically active. So in terms of the pandemic, as I mentioned in the talk, children are using far more screen time because they have to. They're not in school, they're using screen time as a school site. So that's why we've said trying to maybe limit their leisure screen time to no more than a couple of hours. And that could be on any device. And the idea being that they still get their hour of physical, minimum hour of physical activity in for the day, so that they're not just spending all their time on a screen. A lot of schools I know have introduced fit breaks into their online teaching schedules, just to get children to get up, move, jump, get themselves active again. And I know it's not, it's not a straightforward and easy thing. We have devices, children want to use them, but you as the parent, I guess, knowing what is best for them, it's maybe get your physical movement in first before you have time on leisure time on your tablet or your device.
And we have another question from past Assistant Governor Ken Boodoo. He said there's a media blitz about the benefit of vitamins, omega, etc., and Lucozade. Can you comment on the usefulness of these products?
Right. So I will take you back. Thank you for that question. That's really good. I'll take you back to the slide about the sugar content. Lucozade and energy drinks have really, really high amounts of sugar in them. That's what they're used as energy drinks for. They literally inject a ton of sugar into your system. Unless, as I was saying, you are going to run that off in a marathon or in a sprint or in some kind of sustained physical activity. Yes, the brain doesn't have a fat store, so the brain does need sugar to work. But really, unless you're burning that sugar off with additional physical activity, that's just going to be converted into fat and stored in your body. So energy drinks and Lucozade and things like that, there was actually a strong argument, and there still is in the UK, to actually ban them in the school settings, because it's just too much and it's unregulated. In terms of things like omega, that comes from things like you can get vegan versions or fish oil versions. They are good for heart health. So it's just, I couldn't tell you, there's no evidence to tell you a dose of what you should be having, but omega supplements are absolutely fine.
And past President Deo, he has some comments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Screen time.
Yeah.
We have to be careful about not taking it too literally, in the sense that Ange said that, perhaps one of the ophthalmologists might want to make a comment. It's not just using devices. It is doing work, close-up work, whether it's screen, a book, an iPad, whatever. It has been working at close distances, and there has been an increase in the incidence of and the severity of myopia in children related to screen time. And therefore, this is a challenge. The challenge is, as you said, children don't choose what they eat. The parents make the diet and give them what to eat and give them how many sweet drinks to drink to keep them quiet, how many devices for the same reason. The problem is, one, are the parents able to monitor and manage these devices? And two, do they have or do they take the time to get the kids outdoors? And that's a big challenge in this business about, one, the screen time effect on the eyes, and two, the balance between diet, indoor activities, and outdoor activities in terms of the weight control. When we went to school, Krishna and I, Maria, you are too young to know. In those days, there was one fat boy in the class, and everybody beat up on him. Now, the fat boys outnumber the slim guys. And really, it has to do with parental control.
Can I add a comment to the screen thing? I mean, having young children is a bane in my life, but the problem with screens too is that you have something called a circadian rhythm, which is how your body goes into sleep and wake. And blue light is what sort of dictates that. The sun rises in the morning, you get UV light or blue light, and then it keeps you going through the day. The sun sets, and then you go into the sleep mode. All these screens emit blue light. So when you sit for 8 hours a day at school or whatever they do in 6 hours, and then they do another 6 hours playing games and sending messages and stuff, the entire sleep cycle is disrupted. And I have that problem with the kids in that they used to be in this house by 7:30, lights out, everybody go to sleep. Okay, and that wasn't that long ago. That was when they was in school last year. Now, lights out, they can't sleep. They're wide awake because they've been flushed with this blue light for so many hours in the day that the night isn't the night to them. And then when they do get to sleep, they can't get up in the morning. And from what Ange just said about minimum hours of sleep being so important, it disrupts that. So you're starting on the back foot as it is once you leave them on these devices. You know, there are, I suppose, strategies, as she said, limit time and all that kind of stuff. But as Deo says, I out of the house 8-12 hours a day. So is her mom, the kid's mom, you know, and it's easy for them to get access to these things. And that's the same for everybody. So it's not just the eye effects of short-sightedness or the sedentary effects. It disrupts your whole sleep cycle, which means when you start the day, you're not starting a normal day.
Yeah. So that's what goes back to what I was saying about, you know, in terms of this body being a very finely, exquisitely tuned machine, it needs a certain number of hours of downtime. And unfortunately, devices don't allow that. And when we don't have that, our body goes into a stress mode, a hormone called cortisol is released, and we start processing everything. Our metabolism changes. So that's the science behind exactly what Rishi was saying. And it is a big challenge, especially with the changes made for the pandemic. But whether that means that you put timers to cut off, you know, on your parental controls for devices so that children only have a certain amount of time, and you make agreements with them that they need to do a certain amount of reading with a book or physical activity, or as they were saying, actually come out of the house and do certain activities. It does take a lot more supervision, and it is quite a challenge, and it's something that has come up unique to this pandemic situation. Also, schools, as I say, encouraging your children's schools to actually take on fit breaks is also quite a useful thing, because some of the schools have done it, and I think it works quite well for younger children. I know older children probably won't engage in it necessarily, but it certainly is helpful for the younger ones.
Okay, any more questions or comments from the chat, Maria?
No more questions or comments.
Okay, if no more comments or questions.
That's Krishna.
Yeah.
A number of us in this group here are grandparents, right?
And a number.
And I know your location. So here's the thing. Part of your role, brother, is not just to spoil the children indoors. You have to take them outdoors and play a little ball on them and get them to burn some of the calories that they eat. You know.
Thank you. I tried that with both of the grandchildren here. Okay, thanks for the comment. Thanks for the questions. And more importantly, thanks to Ange for excellent presentation. Very, very coordinated, fluent, you know, between the slide and her oral presentation. Very little pause or interruption. All the messages were connected. You see, she's very passionate about the subject, very knowledgeable about the subject, and, you know, also very good presenter. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of all the members of the Rotary Club. As you know, as I indicated earlier on, our next session is on the 10th of February on Glaucoma Week. And in this session, you had comments and questions from Rishi and Deo. You're invited to join, and you will be the one who could ask Rishi and Deo questions on the 10th. So
I will enjoy
that. Yes, so you could ask them all the hard questions about glaucoma and the eyes on that occasion. So once again, thanks to all for attending, and our next session is on the 10th, and soon I'll be sending out an email on the project, which was announced a little while ago, and we now have a venue, and that'll be an ongoing project. Rotary Club, the inner wheel, and we'll engage the Rotaractors, so we do one larger project as a community project. Thanks again to all, and stay safe.